Well, welcome everyone to the Seeing Rachel YouTube channel. Our first guest is Andrew Wallis of the charity Unseen UK and is based in Bristol. We are thrilled to have you here, Andrew, and also thrilled to have Sandra Isabel Correia, who is the executive producer of Seeing Rachel, live from Lisbon in Portugal. I'd like to frame my first question, Andrew, with the thought that I read just this morning from Joan Miro, that said that the artist begins to create when there is an unresolved tension within them. And that was very much the story for me about Seeing Rachel. There was this unresolved tension with regards to human trafficking, and what could I do about it as a storyteller? So my feeling is, with the inception of Unseen, there may have been a kind of inciting incident for you that was an unresolved tension that you needed to create something, you needed to do something about it. I wonder if you could let us know about that experience for you.
Thank you for having me. We started Unseen, 16 years ago. And if you like, the inspiration for it was becoming aware of the issue through friends that had encountered it in Ukraine. So one friend had stopped a woman being trafficked into sexual exploitation, and another was really concerned about the social orphan problem that the kids at the end of care left the orphanages and often ended up in a trafficking situation. So that kind of piqued my interest. And then what knitted, if you like, all of the sort of pieces together was reading an article that was talking about trafficking from Eastern Europe to the US. And they were using the regional airports within the UK as transit points in order to avoid detection at the major hub airports. And one of those airports that was listed was Bristol. So in my mind, I went from, okay, it's something that happens over there to something that's much closer to home. And I just went off on a journey of sort of discovering, asking lots of awkward questions, and writing lots of letters. I suppose I had some experience around, how you curate interest in a justice issue. That ultimately led to a conversation with a senior police officer who lifted a lid off not just the city of Bristol, but the UK as a whole in terms of the nature and the scale of the problem of human trafficking. And he challenged me to do something about it. And it was, if you like, an instinctive response to say, yeah, no, I actually have to do something about this. And then it was asking the questions, okay, what's needed? Who can help? Who knows more than I do at this point? So there was that inner conviction to do something about it, and then turning it into actually practically doing something. But it was a risk. There was no guarantees. There was no money. There was no people. And yet here we are 16 years later, a national, international charity working on the issue.
Yes, you mentioned Bristol. Seeing Rachel, of course, is going to be filmed and is based, the story is based in Bristol. And we often hear, through media, that Bristol is one of the most desirable places to live in the UK. But then I recall an interview with you on the BBC Points West programme when you stated that Bristol was a distribution hub for trafficking. And that kind of jarred against me, of the most desirable place, and yet this kind of dark underbelly, if you like, of a distribution hub for trafficking. So is that still the case? Has the work of Unseen impacted that situation?
It's a really difficult question to answer. I think that interview, I was drawing back on what I'd discovered about this transit use of Bristol Airport to move people. I think what we know now is that Bristol is not unique in terms of the nature and scale of trafficking. It exists across the UK, across Europe, across the globe. It's found in the major urban centres. It's found in towns, in villages, and in the countryside. So I think what we've learned over the last 16 years is just how pervasive a problem it is. And anyone that's tried to sort of scope what is the size of the problem, the numbers unfortunately keep going up. Now, is it a growing problem, or are we waking up to the fact that it's always been there? We often talk about it as a crime that's hidden in plain sight. And just as you raise awareness, more people understand it. I think it's a mix of the two around that. In terms of the work that Unseen has delivered and the impact, I remember in 2010, 2011, sitting in the Home Office arguing that we needed major legislation, an independent anti-slavery commissioner, a national helpline, better support for victims, recognition that kids were caught up in this, and the need for businesses to look at their supply chains around issues of forced labor. And basically being told you won't get those 6 things. And yet within 4 years, I also remember being in Parliament and seeing the culmination of the Modern Slavery Act, the bill becoming an act. And within, a year of that, so in a 5-year period, we got everything that we were told that we wouldn't get. So I do like being told no, because it makes me more determined. And I can point to metrics around, yes, the media is more interested in it, there's more reporting about it, we're finding more victims, we're caring for more victims than ever before, we're working with more businesses than ever before, we run the UK's modern slavery and exploitation helpline, and we're seeing more calls than ever, more, over 30,000 victims identified since we opened it. So yes, we've had impact, but it's still an unfair fight because this is a $500 billion industry globally. And last year we spent globally about $380 million fighting this problem. So it's still a big problem that needs to be addressed.
You always get these reports of the growing industry. And like you say, whether the reporting is getting better or the problem is getting worse, we're probably not sure. Seeing Rachel is quite a different film in the fact that what has come before it, there's been a lot of focus with filmmakers on the supply side. Whereas Seeing Rachel is quite a different beast in that it focuses on the demand side. So we have what you might think of as a nail, if I can use a kind of metaphor of a nail. We look at trafficking as a nail. It has made up of certain materials, human materials. It looks like this, it works like this, it's owned by such and such, it's facilitated by whoever. But it's fine to describe it, which I think what the supply chain films do. But what I want Seeing Rachel to be is a kind of hammer on that nail to drive it home. So I wonder now, if we're getting into the kind of media side of things, what are your thoughts on how media and film can help bringing awareness, but hopefully an end to human trafficking and modern day slavery? Because I recall the premiere of My Name is Sorrow, which we held many years ago now in 2012. And you were saying, well, let's hope that Jeff doesn't need to make his film. And here we are some 12 years later, and there's still the need. And here we are venturing out. What do you think, what can film do? What can the media do to raise awareness, but to help bring about the end of slavery?
Well, first, I really like the fact that you are saying, actually, we need to look at the demand end of the equation. So, I mean, the way that I define modern slavery, which is this umbrella term, is that it's an illicit commodity trade, and the commodity is human beings that are bought, sold, and exploited. But why does that commodity trade exist in the first place? Is because there's a demand for cheap goods and cheap services and cheap labor. And then why does that matter? Because each and every one of us actually contribute to the problem. So, if we wear clothes, we use consumer electronics, and eat food, then we're personally connected to probably 40 or 60 slaves that are trapped in forced labor in the world supply chains without doing anything. So I think if you then say, okay, well, what's the role of media? The media's role is to explain things so that people get it, but hopefully explain it in a way that then people feel compelled to act and to change. And this has always been the role of media, but funnily enough, it's always been the role in tackling slavery. So if you go back to the transatlantic slave trade, the social media of the day, the Wedgwoods, the pamphleting and all of that, over time persuaded the public and helped the public understand what was the nature of the problem, but also explained to them, well, here are things that I can do. I'm often asked, you paint this picture of 50 million slaves or $500 billion, but what can I do? And one of the things is become more informed so you can make better decisions in that whole process. Become more informed so that you can advocate for change. You can be political with a small p. So I'm not talking about being part of a party politics, but everything is political. And so we've got a problem in modern slavery that has become so enmeshed and so embedded into society that we need a whole of society's response. Media's role is to shine a light on things and say, did you know? And now that you know, what are you going to do?
That takes you back to Wilberforce, that once you know, you can't unknow, and therefore you have to act. For Seeing Rachel, it was due to be filmed in 2016-17, and through various reasons, it didn't happen. And part of the problem, I think, was the fact that the financing of film works on comparables. And if you can show a comparable, that's great. But until Sound of Freedom last year, there wasn't really a comparable, because every film I looked at, The Whistleblower or Lilia Forever, they all looked at the supply side, but bombed at the box office, so it didn't have an impact. Were you aware of the impact of The Sound of Freedom worldwide?
I was aware of the film. I think I had some... look, it's that old adage, any coverage is good coverage around that. And I think it is, some of it just builds. I think, coming back to, what's the role of the media? I think the role of media also has a real responsibility in how we tell stories and what is the purpose for telling stories. And to not fall into the trap of sensationalizing something or painting a picture that isn't the whole picture. A lot of the work, and especially if you're looking at the demand side of things, it sometimes feels slow and deliberate, because actually it's really complex and you've got to work those things through. And I think what I've learned over the years is, it comes back to this whole of society, which is, hey, how do we all collaborate together to tell these stories? Because nothing is in isolation. But look, that film has raised increased levels of awareness within certain parts of society about the nature and scale of the problem. But it's not the whole picture, and it's often, I think, what people do, when people look for the sensational side of it, they forget actually there's a much, much bigger sort of tale of just everyday exploitation that is taking place. So, when I started Unseen, the whole narrative was around trafficking for sexual exploitation, if that was the be-all and end-all of what was going on. Well, actually, now here in the UK and around the globe, the vast majority of people are in situations of forced labor. And yet that's not had the focus that it has. And in some ways, I would say, well, maybe that's because it ultimately comes back to us as consumers, because we want these goods and these services, and we want things done cheaply, but we are prepared to turn a blind eye to the circumstances in which they're making. But that doesn't always make for the sexiest film either. So, it's, how do we tell stories that are told in a way that people want to engage with them, but also inform them? And it's a really difficult thing to do.
I want to ask you, Andrew, what do you think we need more to raise awareness in our society about human trafficking? And better than that, how to solve it or to prevent? How we can raise awareness to prevent? Because we have the problem, but how we can prevent that? And I would like to have your vision on that.
I think stories that confront us with just how close we are to the issue are really powerful. It's especially if, I remember a friend of mine saying the best stories are the ones that creep up behind you, kick you in the pants, and run away very, very quickly. So when you turn around, you're not quite sure what's happened, but you know the residue of the kick is still there. And it's those kind of stories where people go, oh, now I get it. Now I understand. You know, if so, for example, we've just done a huge campaign around the care sector here in the UK, where we're seeing forced labour, exploitation of care workers. That really grabbed the attention of the public, of government, of the health service, of social care, because you know, especially in the Western world, in an aging population, everybody knows somebody or has somebody that's in the care sector and goes, oh my goodness, it's not like 6 degrees of separation, it's 1 or 2 degrees of separation, and that person could be exploited. So I think it's bringing people like close to the issue, and then without being preachy, saying there is something that you can do. And it could be initially, we are telling this story so that you recognize the signs, so you then know what to do when you see that. Or it could be, we are bringing you close to this story so that you recognize the signs, so that you are compelled to do something about it. And whether that's through consumer choice or engaging with politicians, engaging with your neighbors and the members of your society. So I think that there's various stages. So one is around awareness. The more that people are aware, that the less likelihood they can deny that they don't know, and everything around that. The other is around how do you change those structural issues? To your point, like how do we stop it in the first place? Well, we have to re-educate people around the cost of cheap goods, services, and labor. We have to actually say there's a value equation in here, and there are people involved here. And that's a commercial argument, that's a political argument, that's a storytelling element, that's a public awareness. And we need to go to a place where the public go, actually, this is not the world I want to live in. Because I now get it, that this could be somebody's brother, sister, mother, father, uncle, aunt, niece, nephew. And it's not just a problem that's over there, it's a problem that's here. And if enough people in society get that and feel compelled to act, then the wheels turn. And, you know, I've seen this in the UK in terms of in 2 years went from producing a report to seeing primary legislation. But I've also seen the flip side of that in the last 3 years in the UK of legislation taking away some of the hard-won gains that we got with the Modern Slavery Act. So it's a constant battle in all of that. If I go completely esoteric, it's about building different economic models for how we do business. Because unless we do that, we're just going to apply sticking plasters to a problem. So it's about how do we both meet the need immediately in front of us, but then do the hard thinking around actually what needs to change structurally.
It's a big challenge with many sides, but I believe that if we can, through our stories, engage other people, and also to educate about the subject, I think also we need to invest on education about the subject, and not only about human trafficking, but about the new economy, about the how we must do our economic and our rules in the good way, not with the behaviors we have today. So I agree with you, and thank you, Jeff.
And you never know who's going to see the film and what that inspires them to do.
I remember when I was writing and researching back in 2012-13 the story, there was a great kind of sense of not in my backyard, you know, pushing it away. Oh, it's an Eastern European problem, or it's a problem. Oh, it's Thailand, it's Cambodia, you know, it's those kind of countries. And so I wanted to put the narrative firmly right in the middle of Bristol and tell a story about a Bristol family and the exploitation of a young schoolgirl. I'm very much aware of everything to do with the supply chain. And the National Crime Office, in its statement on modern slavery, highlights the supply chain and not the demand side, which is interesting. I think maybe that is a problem for legislative and crime prevention kind of bodies. But I'm kind of wondering, when we speak of this phenomenon, it's quite easy to think of it as opportunist crime rather than a crime which is organized and international in scale. And then that leads us to the problem of, what can I as an individual do about that? How can I make a difference and impact against it?
Jeff, I think you're right, because actually it's both and. Some of it is opportunist, and some of it is what we call a mom and pop operation, and a lot of it is organized criminality, and a very, very sophisticated model. And the reason that the National Crime Agency talk about a supply chain, and we would talk about a supply chain, which is back to my definition of what modern slavery is, which is it's commodifying a human being to exploit them. And that commodification can take place within families. You know, we see that over and over again. It can take place in every single situation of slavery and trafficking. That's what happens, is that an exploiter, you know, whether it's organized criminal or family member, looks at another human being and doesn't see them as a human being. They just see them as a money-making machine. And so they then look for that opportunity in which to make money, and you know, and they prey on vulnerable people to do that. So if you say, well, what can I do about that? Well, it's not about becoming a have-a-go hero. It's about reporting what you see, because you may have a piece of intelligence that is the final piece of the jigsaw that allows law enforcement to act and execute a warrant. You may often be, you know, the eyes and ears that need to see it, but actually also critically a voice for somebody that doesn't have a voice. Remember, people that are held in situations of trafficking and exploitation are terrified. They feel that they can't speak up, that they're not free to leave that situation. And so they're reliant on people to see them. We talk about see the unseen. No play on the name of our charity, but it's really important that is going on. That, you know, I could tell you story after story of calls that we've had from members of the public calling the helpline, going, "I saw this," or "I had a gut feeling about this," and they called it in, and we shared that intelligence with the police, and it led to, you know, multiple people being rescued from situations of exploitation. So that's important. But to come back to the demand side is, if you know, say, for example, there's a huge vulnerability of exploitation, say in a car wash or in a nail bar, and you just choose to ignore it and go there, then actually, are you contributing to a criminal enterprise? Are you contributing to the exploitation and the ongoing commodification of a human being? Yes, your answer is yes, you are. So it's about taking that responsibility as well and choosing not to.
Going back to the supply chain, we've had lots of legislation that's been passed, and yet there you were on the Spencer Lodge podcast, and you were saying that the perpetrators of modern slavery in all its forms, there's less than a 1% chance of them being prosecuted. That really shook me. That stunned me because of all the legislation.
That's a global consistent figure. And why is that? Well, I mean, certainly from a UK context, the codification of the law is that, yes, it's a really serious crime. The tariff is all the way up to life. Therefore, there's quite a high threshold in order to prove that that's happened, so, which I don't have a problem with. I think things begin to break down when you don't have, say, specialist police and multi-agency teams looking at this, because it's a complex crime. We also know if you don't care for victims really well, then they're less likely to want to engage with law enforcement and to be involved in a prosecution. But third, we shouldn't underestimate the fear that these victims have, because often the way that they're controlled is the threats of violence are not just against them, but against their extended family. And that's as a means of controlling them. And so you have to address all of these issues. It's not just that, okay, here's the silver bullet. If we did this, then prosecution rates would go up. But I would say, first and foremost, let's take really good care of these individuals and support them. Then let's properly resource policing to do, if you like, the right level of investigation so that those crimes can come forward. And remember that they are financial crimes. Let's actually, and this law is just passed in the EU in terms of businesses, let's force businesses to do the human rights due diligence that they should be doing, so that they are preventing it happening in the first place. But then also, I think we need governments to enforce the law. Laws are only laws when they're enforced. Otherwise, they're just ink on paper. And so you need all of this sort of coordinated effort. Now, having said that, have we seen more prosecutions than we did 15 years ago? Yes, but the pace of change is way too slow. And so, we've got to invest in training the right teams, in making sure that that level of understanding is there, and that there is a willingness to both, in the words of Al Capone, follow the money, but then also actually go after the bad guys.
I think for me personally, and perhaps for lots of people, the most depressing side of human trafficking and modern day slavery is that demand aspect of the industry. How can a charity like Unseen deal with that? Or is that something that you need to work in association with the likes of writers and filmmakers and media people? Is it, how do you face that problem of demand at Unseen?
Well, one of it is doing something like this and encouraging you to make this film, because actually then that raises further awareness of just how the demand side of the equation works. The other is working with politicians to devise laws that tackle these issues. We also work with a growing number of businesses, from global multinational businesses down to SMEs, helping them tackle forced labor within their supply chains. We do policy and research, so at that academic level, looking at what are the economic models, what are the things that need to change around that. And so it's not a silver bullet approach. It's a whole of society's approach. We say one of our key strategic aims is to educate society. So we look for every opportunity to do that, so that people become curious, and then people become activists around it. And that's for the public, that's for politicians, that's for industrialists, that's for law enforcement, and for media as well.
My intent with Seeing Rachel, yes, to film it in Bristol, to bring it into our world, the Western world, to shine a light on that. When I look at a film like Sound of Freedom, that had great impact, but films before that didn't. I'm just wondering, when you see a film about human trafficking, what do you hope for? What makes you engage with it, or what makes you disengage?
I'm probably the worst person to ask that question, because I know too much. But having said that, I'm always an advocate for it. We don't need to sensationalize this story. It's sensationalized enough. The fact that human beings are bought, sold, and exploited is enough. But I think we need to move the story on from, and this is why I'm excited that you're looking at the demand side, which is this is not another action hero movie just with a different story sort of meshed across the top of it, because that actually isn't reality. The reality is this is something that is almost so common garden that people don't see it, that people aren't aware of it. And so how do we tell those stories that make people curious? That it's, oh, I didn't realize the world was this way in that. Now, it may not necessarily be the box office blockbuster, but that's about entertainment. And I'm somewhat queasy when we put entertainment with this subject. I think it's a much more nuanced storytelling that we need to do, and thoughtful storytelling in that whole process. That I think over time has bigger impact, because people go, I didn't realize actually how mundane this issue was, or how common this issue was. Because go back to the other blockbuster about the other big trafficking blockbuster, Taken with Liam Neeson. A number of times, people get thinking, oh, I just want to become Liam Neeson and run around the world and rescue people. That isn't the reality. That isn't, it's not my job. It never will be my job. Because it's a collaborative effort to tackle this issue.
I actually think that Taken wasn't really about human trafficking. It was more about revenge, wasn't it? So I'm with Seeing Rachel. Yes, it's not an action hero movie, you'll be pleased to know. It's a psychological noirish kind of film, which looks at the internal workings of demand in the frame of a human being. I mentioned about the hammer and the nail, and I was reminded of a word from James Baldwin, the American writer, who talked about the illusion of safety in society, and what the artist needed to do was to disturb the peace, to destroy the illusion. And I'm very much hoping and praying that Seeing Rachel will be that kind of event when it hits the screens, that it disturbs the peace, it disturbs our slumber, and stirs within us some call to action, whatever that might be.
I think that's a great aim. And when you were saying that, it took me back to 16, 17 years ago when I had that conversation with that police officer. And that's what he did. He lifted a lid of, the veneer of Bristol is the most desirable place to live, but actually a very thin veneer, and there was trafficking and exploitation in the city and across the country, and that's the powerful reveal. So I wish you both the absolute best in delivering that, because like I said earlier, you never know who will watch that, and that might be the spur for them to do something that ripples and has an even greater impact.
That is what we want. That to make a change in the mindset, or to make with Seeing Rachel, there are some things that will stay, what? And your emotions will change and leads you to some reaction, and okay, let's do something, or I don't want to do that. So that is one of our aims.
So we just want to thank you, Andrew, for taking your time. We want to support Unseen, adopt Unseen as part of our strategy to get the word out there, and also, enable those that are working at the coalface, as it were. Is there anything you'd like to tell us by way of a goodbye or an appeal or anything? How people can get involved with Unseen?
Well, thanks, Jeff, and thanks for the support. And again, wishing you all the very best with with your endeavors. I think two things. One is, if you know the signs, and you can find them on our website, unseenuk.org, then if you see something, report it to the helpline. Either the website or calling 08000 121 700, because you might have that very piece of information that can transform a life, from a place of exploitation to a place of freedom. And then secondly, we're all called in different ways. So, the expectation is you don't have to go and start a new piece of work or another charity or something. But my strong encouragement to support Unseen, what we do does have huge impact, and we have a track record of impact, but we need individuals and organizations and companies and society to support us as we work on this issue. And that's why we're really grateful for what you guys are doing in raising awareness through the skills and the talents that you have to tell a story that will have an impact wider than we can.
On that note, to our viewers, please like and subscribe to the channel. It does help. It helps with our profile and with YouTube, and it does really make a difference to us. There'll be more videos to come, but again, I just wanted to thank Andrew for taking the time out to speak to Sandra and I. And I'm Jeff Hall. I'm the writer-director of Seeing Rachel. Sandra is the executive producer. Our producer, Ben Richards, is currently in the Marché de Film at the Cannes Film Festival. Thank you so much. And yes, I feel like saying peace be with you, but you know what I mean.